February 19, 2024, News Report 1. Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi visited Germany from February 16 to 21 to attend the Munich Security Conference. During the conference, he held talks with foreign ministers from European and American countries. This visit showed a noticeable softening of Wang Yi's previous hardline stance, with frequent gestures of goodwill towards various countries, making it a charm offensive. During his meeting with Canadian Foreign Minister Melanie Joly on February 17, Wang Yi stated that China and Canada are not competitors or enemies, but should be partners. While China-Canada relations were once ahead of China's relations with Western countries, the current difficulties do not serve the interests of both sides. The Canadian government also stated that the two foreign ministers discussed important global security issues and agreed that dialogue should continue on the basis of mutual respect. Wang Yi met with Ukrainian Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba on February 17. The Chinese Foreign Ministry issued a statement saying that Wang Yi pledged that China would not seek private gains in the Ukrainian situation, nor would it sell lethal weapons to the conflicting parties. Wang Yi emphasized at the conference that China-Russia relations are stable and non-aligned, non-confrontational, and not directed against third parties. Kuleba tweeted that they discussed bilateral relations, trade, and the need to restore just and lasting peace in Ukraine, believing it necessary to maintain contacts and continue dialogue between Ukraine and China. Wang Yi met with British Foreign Secretary Liz Truss on February 16. The UK Foreign Office stated that Truss clearly expressed the UK's position on human rights issues in Hong Kong and Xinjiang, demanding the release of Jimmy Lai, the founder of Apple Daily. Wang Yi, on the other hand, stated that China and the UK should work together to expand converging interests, properly handle differences, and promote the return of China-UK relations to a track of healthy and stable development. Wang Yi met with Josep Borrell, the EU High Representative for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy, on February 16. The European External Action Service stated that Borrell hoped China would not support Russia, but support a peaceful solution to the Ukraine crisis and participate in the Global Peace Summit on Ukraine. Borrell expressed EU support for the One China policy but emphasized the need to maintain peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait and hoped for early EU-China human rights dialogue. Wang Yi emphasized cooperation and mutual benefit, highlighting cooperation in climate and artificial intelligence. Wang Yi met with French Foreign Minister Jean-Yves Le Drian on February 17. Wang Yi stated that as independent and influential major countries, China and France should strengthen dialogue and cooperation, jointly support multilateral initiatives, and shape a peaceful and stable multipolar world. The Global Times Daily Explosive Commentary pointed out that Wang Yi's speech at the Munich conference was suspicious, as his views on world conflicts were more aggressive than last year, leaving many questions unanswered and creatively handling facts. Overall, Wang Yi showed a strong yet gentle attitude during this diplomatic activity, demonstrating China's diversity and flexibility in handling international relations. News Report 2. The Chinese Coast Guard announced that it would conduct regular patrols in the waters between Kinmen and Xiamen. On the morning of February 19, 4 Chinese Coast Guard ships appeared in the area, one of which was 92 meters long, belonging to a large law enforcement ship. This incident stemmed from Chinese fishermen crossing the restricted fishing waters of Kinmen on February 14. The Taiwan Coast Guard pursued them, leading to the deaths of 2 fishermen. On February 15, the Taiwan Coast Guard expressed regret over the incident and pointed out that the Chinese vessels entered the restricted waters 1.6 kilometers and capsized while maneuvering to escape. The vessels involved had no ship name, ship certificates, or ship registration certificates, becoming a shared concern for cross-strait law enforcement. Both sides will ban such vessels. The Mainland Affairs Council of Taiwan stated that Chinese fishing boats repeatedly entered Taiwan's waters during the Spring Festival, seriously infringing on the rights of Taiwanese fishermen and the livelihoods of both sides. The Taiwan Affairs Office spokesperson Zhu Fenglian said that the waters between Kinmen and Xiamen have been traditional fishing grounds for fishermen from both sides since ancient times, and there are no restricted waters. She does not recognize Taiwan's claims. Regarding the deaths of 2 Chinese fishermen, she said it has seriously hurt feelings. The mainland was accused of using the deaths of fishermen to advance its borders and squeeze Taiwan's operating space. News Report 3. According to Kyodo News, Australian Defence Minister Peter Dutton recently stated that while Japan is a technologically advanced country, China's state cannot reach Japan's level. He hopes that Japan can participate in the second pillar of AUKUS, jointly developing hypersonic weapons and artificial intelligence. AUKUS refers to the trilateral security partnership between the United Kingdom, the United States, and Australia, established in 2021. The first pillar aims to help Australia establish a nuclear-powered submarine fleet and assist it in acquiring nuclear submarine construction capabilities. The second pillar is to cooperate and develop in fields such as networks and quantum computing, with New Zealand and Canada expressing willingness to join. Dutton also stated that Japan's participation in long-range missile launch experiments in Australia is strongly welcomed. In addition, the Reciprocal Access Agreement between Japan and Australia came into effect last August, and Japan plans to have F-35A stealth fighters frequently patrol between Japan and Australia. Currently, Australia, the United States, and the United Kingdom make up the first pillar of AUKUS, while New Zealand and Canada constitute the second pillar. Dutton hopes to include Japan in AUKUS, and other industrial countries in Europe are also likely to be attracted to join the security partnership. News Report 4. According to Agence France-Presse, Chinese vessels blocked Filipino vessels 4 times in the waters near Huangyan Island on February 15 and 16, trying to prevent them from delivering supplies to Filipino fishermen. At the time, AFP and other media reporters were on board the Filipino vessels to record the entire process. When the Filipino vessels approached the waters near Huangyan Island, Chinese vessels blocked their route and stayed in the fairway to hinder their progress. These Chinese vessels include a naval vessel, a Coast Guard vessel, and some maritime militia vessels. Huangyan Island is a group of coral reefs and rocks in the South China Sea, which China occupied from the Philippines in 2012. News Report 5. According to Reuters, the Israeli cabinet unanimously passed a resolution on February 18 opposing unilateral recognition of the State of Palestine, stating that any recognition of Palestine must be achieved through direct negotiations. The United States has been trying to reach a broad agreement that includes normalization of relations between Israel and Arab countries such as Saudi Arabia and the establishment of a Palestinian state. Secretary of State Antony Blinken said at the Munich Security Conference that the next few months are the best opportunity for Israel to normalize relations with Arab countries and establish a Palestinian state, emphasizing the need to establish an independent Palestinian state. The Israeli Prime Minister's office stated that the unanimous decision of the Israeli cabinet reflects Israel's firm rejection of international demands. In addition, Israeli War Cabinet member and opposition leader Benny Gantz said in Jerusalem to American Jewish leaders that unless Hamas releases hostages before the March disaster month, Israel will launch a ground offensive against Gaza. He also said that Israel will continue to fight until the goals are achieved, including eliminating the threat of Hamas and Hezbollah in Lebanon, bringing back the remaining 130 hostages, and completely removing Gaza from Hamas control. Gantz also opposed the unilateral recognition of the State of Palestine, believing it is not the way to achieve regional stability and peace. According to recent surveys, the Israeli people consider Gantz to be the best candidate for the next president. On the other hand, according to the Wall Street Journal, the U.S. government is preparing to provide Israel with tens of millions of dollars worth of weapons, including Mk-82 bombs and KMU-572 joint direct attack munitions. This arms sale plan is currently under internal review by the U.S. government and will be submitted to Congress for approval. Last December, the the U.S. government sold weapons worth $250 million to Israel, including 155mm and 120mm shells. News Report 6. According to the South China Morning Post, the United States currently has a total of 11 nuclear-powered submarines, 3 of which are deployed in the Western Pacific carrying out missions, with 2 more set to arrive soon. This will be the first time in history that 5 U.S. aircraft carrier strike groups appear simultaneously in the Western Pacific. According to observations by the U.S. Naval Institute on February 5, the USS Abraham Lincoln aircraft carrier has left the port of San Diego, California, and is heading towards the Western Pacific. The USS Washington will replace the USS Reagan in deployment in the Western Pacific, while the USS Reagan will leave its base in Japan's Yokosuka and return to the Puget Sound Naval Shipyard in Washington State, USA, for maintenance. The USS Carl Vinson aircraft carrier deployed in Guam on February 12 and will stay in the Western Pacific for 4 days. The USS Roosevelt aircraft carrier deployed in Guam on February 12 and will also stay in the Western Pacific for 4 days. The USS Roosevelt aircraft carrier deployed in Hawaii on February 12 and will stay in the Western Pacific until July. Barton, associate professor at the University of Nottingham Malaysia campus, said that the deployment of 5 aircraft carriers by the United States in the Western Pacific has several reasons. First, it sends a strong message to U.S. Indo-Pacific allies that the United States will ensure the security of its allies. Second, it sends a deterrent message to China and North Korea, as their military activities have been increasing recently. Even as U.S.-China relations improve, containing China remains a top priority for the United States. Third, it indicates to the outside world that despite the United States currently being distracted by 2 wars, the Indo-Pacific region remains the United States' most strategically important area. News Report 7. Chinese Minister of Public Security Wang Xiaohong and U.S. Secretary of Homeland Security Mayorkas held talks in Austria on February 18. The Department of Homeland Security issued a statement saying that the 2 sides discussed issues such as combating the spread of drug precursors and had candid and constructive discussions on expanding bilateral cooperation and protecting children from online sexual exploitation and abuse. Xinhua News Agency reported that Wang Xiaohong and Mayorkas agreed to implement the consensus of the 2 countries' leaders and maintain dialogue and cooperation in the fields of drug control and law enforcement. Wang Xiaohong requested that the United States correct its practice of categorizing China as a major source of drugs and demanded that the U.S. stop interrogating Chinese students to ensure they enjoy fair entry treatment and dignity, while also ensuring the safety of Chinese diplomatic missions and personnel in the United States. However, in fact, U.S. Customs has always maintained a strict attitude towards legally documented international students, and the percentage of random checks is not high. Chinese officials have repeatedly mentioned the practice of U.S. Customs interrogating Chinese students, claiming that it causes panic among the Chinese, but there is currently no information confirming this claim. News Report 8. After the Chinese New Year holiday, the foreign exchange market and stock market reopened, with the Chinese yuan depreciating and A-shares rising. On February 19, the Chinese yuan opened lower, falling to 7.1982 at one point during trading and closing at 7.1976, hitting a 2-week low. Offshore yuan was reported at 7.2141 in the Asian session and 7.2094 at 8 a.m. U.S. Eastern Time. The People's Bank of China lowered the yuan's midpoint on February 14 and 15, with the midpoint announced on February 19 at 7.1032. Traders pointed out that strong economic data released by the United States during the Chinese New Year holiday led to market expectations of a Fed rate cut being postponed, increasing pressure on the Chinese yuan. On the other hand, the Chinese stock market A-shares began to rise on February 9. The Shanghai Composite Index closed at 2,910 points, up 44 points or 1.56%, with a turnover of 440 billion yuan. The Shenzhen Component Index closed at 8,902 points, up 81 points or 1%, with a turnover of 515.1 billion yuan. Although the stock market has risen since the new chairman of the China Securities Regulatory Commission took office, this has not changed the fundamentals, as the Chinese economy has not improved. The sustainability of the rise remains to be seen, and investors can make decisions based on their own judgment, but they need to be aware of the risks. News Report 9. According to a report by the Wall Street Journal, during the 2023 Chinese New Year period, despite growth in various consumption indicators, there were signs of weak demand in China, presenting a situation of polarization, which is ironic. The report stated that this year's Chinese New Year holiday was one day longer than before, with higher temperatures, coupled with a large amount of suppressed demand, leading to distorted data. During this year's Chinese New Year holiday, the number of Chinese people traveling reached 474 million, a year-on-year increase of 34%, an increase of 19% from 2019. However, data from the People's Bank of China showed that the total industry online payment amount during the Chinese New Year period was 77.4 trillion yuan, an increase of 10% year-on-year. The catering, accommodation, tourism, retail, and movie box office sectors were all of interest, with a year-on-year increase of 20%. Data from the National Tourism Administration showed that the number of people entering and leaving the country during this year's Chinese New Year reached 13.51 million, an increase of 2.8 times year-on-year, but only about 90% of the level in 2019. Among them, the flow of people at the land ports between Guangdong, Hong Kong, and Macau was the largest, accounting for 73% of the total entry and exit. Data from the Civil Aviation Administration showed that during the Chinese New Year period, the civil aviation passenger traffic reached 179 million, a historical high, with 137,000 flights and an average of 14,000 passenger flights per day, an increase of 17.7% over 2019 and 23% over 2023. Most Chinese people chose domestic tourism, while outbound tourism mainly went to Hong Kong and Macau, with few tourists elsewhere. The box office reached 8 billion yuan, an 18% increase year-on-year, and the ticket price for this year's Chinese New Year season was 49.7 yuan, slightly down. News Report 10. According to China Central Television, CCTV, as of February 18, more than 40,000 passengers were still stranded in Jiuquan City, Gansu Province, due to the impact of strong winds and snowfall. Starting from the morning of February 17, temporary road closure measures were implemented on highways from Gansu to various parts of China, leading to a large number of people being stranded in the city. The Gansu Provincial Highway Bureau has initiated a Level 3 response to emergencies, completely closing highways. The Central Meteorological Observatory issued an orange alert for a cold wave from February 18 to 22, predicting that most parts of China will experience severe temperature drops, with Inner Mongolia, northeast China, Hubei, Hunan, and other areas seeing temperature drops of over 20 degrees Celsius, along with heavy snowstorms. The report pointed out that this year's Chinese New Year holiday was one day longer than before, with higher temperatures, coupled with a large amount of suppressed demand, leading to distorted data. During this year's Chinese New Year holiday, the number of Chinese people traveling reached 474 million, a year-on-year increase of 34%, but data from the People's Bank of China showed that the total industry online payment amount during the Chinese New Year period was 77.4 trillion yuan, an increase of 10% year-on-year. The catering, accommodation, tourism, retail, and movie box office sectors were all of interest, with a year-on-year increase of 20%. Data from the National Tourism Administration showed that the number of people entering and leaving the country during this year's Chinese New Year reached 13.51 million, an increase of 2.8 times year-on-year, but only about 90% of the level in 2019. Among them, the flow of people at the land ports between Guangdong, Hong Kong, and Macau was the largest, accounting for 73% of the total entry and exit. Data from the Civil Aviation Administration showed that during the Chinese New Year period, the civil aviation passenger traffic reached 179 million, a historical high, with 137,000 flights and an average of 14,000 passenger flights per day, an increase of 17.7% over 2019 and 23% over 2023. Most Chinese people chose domestic tourism, while outbound tourism mainly went to Hong Kong and Macau, with few tourists elsewhere. The box office reached 8 billion yuan, an 18% increase year-on-year, and the ticket price for this year's Chinese New Year season was 49.7 yuan, slightly down. The report also noted that the cold weather will be accompanied by strong winds and dust storms, with the Central Meteorological Observatory also issuing blue warnings for strong winds and dust storms. Data released by the Freedom House-affiliated One Word website showed that from September to December 2023, China experienced 777 labor protests, an increase of 532 from the same period last year. These protests were mainly related to wage disputes, occupational safety, poor working conditions, and China's ongoing economic difficulties. Li Chang, founder of the Labor Observation Group, said that the decrease in manufacturing orders has led many companies to face financial crises, and there are also problems with workers' income. The collapse of the real estate sector has led to the absence of formal contracts between migrant workers and employers, making the impact of the real estate industry's collapse particularly severe on migrant workers.